Welcome to Neurotypicals Don't Juggle Chainsaws, the podcast that cuts through the rubbish to explore the world of neurodiversity. I'm your host, Nic King.
And I'm your host, Kate Fox, and together we're here to explore, understand and celebrate being neurodivergent in a neurotypical world. From ADHD and autism to dyslexia and other quirky brains, we talk about it all.
And go off on tangents. So whether you're neurodivergent, love someone who is, or you're just curious about neurodivergent minds, you are in the right place.
Let's get ready to juggle some words and maybe even a few chainsaws, metaphorically, of course. Welcome to the latest episode of Neurotypicals Don't Juggle Chainsaws with Kate Fox and Nic King. Today, we're going to look at something that we have mentioned before in passing, because it's certainly, I think, part of both our day-to-day vocabularies, but it's spoons. Spoon theory, which actually is essentially a theory of energy available to you, energy accounting. It's an energy accounting theory. Nic, can you remember where or when you first heard about spoon theory and how it struck you?
I think because I am somebody who has chronic pain, that it hit me through that community first, which I think's not so much chronic pains where it originated, but correct me now, Christine
Miserandino.
Thanks. Was apparently she was sitting in a cafe and she was trying to explain her energy accounting to her friend. And because she was in a cafe, she grabbed a bunch of spoons. And her theory was that she had sort of 12 spoons at the start of the day. But because she had sort of like chronic conditions that involve sort of like fatigue and pain and things like that, she was like, you need to understand that just, washing my hair takes a spoon. Coming out of the house might take 2 spoons. And, making my tea at the end of the day might take 3 spoons. And I might be out of spoons by the end of the day. And if that happens really, really regularly, I get ill. And so that was how she was explaining it to her friend. And I think it was just sort of, it's one of those brilliant metaphors, isn't it? That's just been taken on by not only sort of those communities around sort of like fatigue and MS and ME and that kind of thing, and chronic pain communities, but also with when you're a divergent community as well, because we do need to think about our energy accounting. We do need to think about what's available to us. We do need to think about sort of that management of if we have a task upcoming that we know takes a lot of energy. We have, space to maybe try and gather some extra before, save some spoons before, or vice versa. If you have an event coming up that is going to take a lot of your energy, you can plan in time afterwards for recovery. And I think I love a visual, and I think as a visual and as a metaphor, it's brilliant and beautiful. Where did you first come across it?
I think it was probably online a few years ago, and it was actually via the kind of hashtag actually autistic community on Twitter talking about spoon. So I hadn't encountered it in a previous space. And it was such a revelation, even the idea of energy accounting and the fact that there might be this unpredictability actually in the energy available to you, so I didn't have a language for that, even though really my entire life, it felt like, was governed by what I was not recognizing as either actual burnout or coming home after a day of lots of people in a very busy environment. Maybe if I'd gone to be a poet for a conference in particular, such a busy environment for a long time, and then just to come home and spend the next day in bed. And I didn't have any language around that at all. I just knew that was what I needed to do. I remember introducing spoon theory to an ex-boyfriend, and how powerful it was for him, because he also had no language whatsoever to talk about, I am going to need to sit and play video games for 4 hours now because I have run out of spoons, or to even think about, oh, but I have restored some spoons by playing video games for 4 hours type of thing. So I've just, yeah, it's a useful metaphor, but also can actually literally, it made me think differently. I am at the moment, and I've seen different kind of memes around this. Of course, there are different types of spoons, aren't there? Or you can further categorize it. So I'm just thinking about, so there's sensory spoons, which might be a bit different to your emotional spoons or your mental spoons, which is all overcomplicating it potentially. But one thing for me around the sensory stuff at the moment, I'm still just getting to grips with how big an impact noisy environments have on me and how many spoons I can save if I use my noise cancelling headphones. And again, if I didn't have this spoon language, I'm not sure I'd be able to quite conceptualize that actually.
And some people like, different languages about it and different metaphors. There's a lot of people who use like batteries and talk about sort of like batteries depleting. And a lot of people some people like the idea of almost like a soundboard where you have like, different like how you're saying sensory and social and stuff like that. And you have different energy levels available within all of those things and how much you can spend and how much you can save. Um, and I'm all on board for whatever metaphors and however you want to use your language around that. But I think it's just so important that we have a language for it.
Exactly. And actually, I have to say, so only recently I was in a context and someone, basically, someone who was very much on a learning journey around neurodivergent stuff said that they knew someone who worked in the NHS and who would refer quite disparagingly to spoonies. And I was a bit like, whoa, whoa, what's that was quite interesting to me because I've never been in a setting where anyone has referred disparagingly to, and I kind of did a
No,
rapid think, oh, that's good. Yeah, that's good then. And that you haven't. I did
but
think,
public service seems to be a very obvious place for that to be happening, but that's a
well,
personal opinion.
indeed, and maybe a bit of an irony because perhaps that sounds like it's referring to someone who comes across a lot of people who are dealing with um, invisible and fluctuating conditions, and themselves is a bit like, oh, for goodness sake, they're talking about their needs again. Probably in an environment where they themselves are perpetually burned out, as are, I would think, a vast majority of NHS staff, and then are kind of getting to, it's almost like, was there a little bit of envy towards some people who had a language with which to talk about this stuff? Because, bigger point, in the capitalist system we're in, the idea that you might need to, well, that you might not have ever available reserves of energy to contribute towards the capitalist machine of growth, that's a bit like, oh, how can you not have? Well, don't worry, we'll pay for a massage for you in-house to increase your resilience. And when you are resilient, then everything will be fine. And
So I go have a candle and light a bath. That was the wrong way around, wasn't it?
I was
Go have a bath and light a
I like
candle.
that better.
However, the other one might be more useful.
Exactly.
I think you
Totally.
I think you're right. I think there is a lot of capitalist or public service organizations that have now, as we stand, for a lot of reasons, normalized burnout. And they have normalized you like having sort of very little energy left for the other aspects of your life. There are definitely some employers where work-life balance is not a real and lived thing. And maybe there is something in that about people who do have language and do set boundaries around like their energy accounting that sits uncomfortably with some other people. But that is possibly within them. I come across a lot of like particularly public servants where I'm like, you know you're not okay, right? Like you know you're not all right. And just because you're not all right doesn't mean that we all have to join the not all right like boat. I don't need to get on. Like, we can sort of do our own thing and set our own boundaries and have accounting. I do something I heard the other day as well, and I think there's something in that. As young people, sort of even outside of like invalidation and stuff like that, there was a huge thing about always giving 100%. And I think that's still there. Like always give 100%. But you don't have 100, you're not meant to be doing that. You're not meant to get to the end of every night absolutely exhausted. You're not meant to get to the end of every weekend absolutely exhausted. Yes, sometimes it can happen, stuff can happen outside of, your control. But if that is your lived experience every day, long term, you're going to hit a very, very nasty burnout.
That is such a good point. That story of give it your all. Well, it feels like that's in kind of sporting narratives as well, isn't it? I gave it my all, and then I won the 100-meter breaststroke, and then unfortunately I was injured and I didn't do anything for 7 years, and then but anyway, yeah, I
Thinking
guess
back to school, which was Northeast in the 90s, we had he was a deputy head teacher and he used to line us up in the yard and get to all shout that we were 110 percenters. And that is ingrained in me somewhere clearly that I'm able to summon that right now. But yeah, I don't think anyone ever sat me down, and as a very logical sort of like autistic person with historically a lot of unmedicated ADHD, I could do a lot of work in a very, very short period of time if I managed to hit hyperfocus. And that attitude of giving 100% could be taken really quite literally. That sort of, I will give you 70 because it's only 70% of my day anyway. But I need to have energy to, go home, make food, talk to a friend, do something, I don't know. And I think there's something sort of ingrained in there somewhere as well, where we're quite normalizing burnout.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know, first of all, how I would have coped with the, 110%. Actually,
100%.
mathematically,
No,
it
no, no.
I think Sir would have been quite
Wrong.
annoyed with my approach around that. But yes, no, we're normalizing burnout. That's true. But because conversely, many of us in the neurodivergent world do have access to what seem like unusually superhuman amounts of energy at certain points. Yeah. I mean,
And then
I've
possibly zero. And
yes,
people sit very uncomfortably with that. People
it
struggle
was
with that.
yes. Well, and it gets back to this. We've certainly talked about this before, people expecting consistency. It was funny the other day, I was basically staying over when I'd done a festival gig, and I was staying with this absolutely lovely couple. I read the man in the couple as autistic. And we didn't at that point have the conversation. We did later, in fact. And oh, this is a whole other, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent. In their family, right, they have this thing and they joke all jokingly between them. So I don't think at this point any of them are diagnosed, or maybe one of the children is, just one of them. And they go, oh, yeah, there's your tism again. Oh, there's one of our tisms. And it passes round and it's like, and done in a very bantery way, this recognition of their shared neurodivergent identity, which is not quite currently in a system officially. Um, anyway, but I didn't know any of that then. It was just this bloke. And so we were talking, and then I noticed a sort of what I recognised as a sort of shutting down. So he'd been very engaged, very on, and then I was like, oh, he's veering away. And he very suddenly said, except not very suddenly, because I'd observed the shutting down, right, I'm off to bed now. And I was thinking, oh, I am in my frame. That was, he just, had loads of spoons and was probably being given some by the conversation and then had none like that and needed to go to bed. And I think for a lot of people, that might have felt like, oh, have I offended him? Or, oh, he's being rude. Do you know what I mean? And it was only because we then had the later conversation, I actually mentioned that moment and said I had seen that happening. And he was talking about how his energy is very, very variable. He can have energy to walk for miles and miles and miles, and not be around people and be full of energy. But then as soon as he's around people, his energy can just dissipate. And I was saying how much I identified with that.
Hello, lovely listener. Are you enjoying the podcast? If you would like to support us, you can leave a tip via the PayPal link on our website at www.neurotypicals.don't-juggle-chainsaws.co.uk. And every little bit will help us keep the show going, and we will truly appreciate it.
It's different amounts of spoons for different things as well, though, isn't it? It's like I can sit on a Zoom all day and deliver training in my home. And I could do it the next day. And I could do it probably the day after that as well, depending on what it was. If I go and do it in person, I know I'm not doing anything the next day that involves like talking. And it's the difference between being in my own home and like in that sort of hour break at lunchtime or whatever, like doing what I want and recovering, to being somewhere strange in a different place with different tech, with different, people, often very random headsets, things like that. And it's, in theory, I'm doing exactly the same thing. In theory, I am delivering a day's worth of training. But actually, the spoons it takes to go and do it on site is very, very different to the spoons it takes to like do it online. Not that I like mind either, people considering employing me, just saying. But it's a different amount of like, if I'm accounting for energy, I've got to plan my work for the next day. We talk about spoons in our house. You know how we have an entirely neurodivergent household that are all very aware. I think something we do have that maybe a lot of people don't. We have a saying, and it's more between me and my husband, that we're not a spoon charity.
Same or
We're not a spoon charity. So, however much, you can look at my social media and either professionally or personally and see something. In reality, there is a huge amount of like effort and spoons that are needed to keep my family being all right. And it's, it's something that can be very, very easily knocked. And sometimes the spoons that we have available are just enough to keep going. Do you know what I mean? To keep putting work, to keep the kids in education, to keep we're all fed and vaguely alive. And sometimes people come along in that moment, and I like to think that I'm sort of generous with my spoons with other people. I like to think that I try and give people my time, my attention, blah blah blah. But sometimes that all sort of just like falls a bit like a house of cards, and I think people are often like, "Oh, where did Nick go?" Or like, "What's quite going on with you?" And sometimes it's the very, very basics of we only have enough spoons like for ourselves. And I think people need to, you can be honest about that. Even if you're just honest with yourself about that, you don't have to necessarily have to like, share that with other people if you don't want to. But I think sometimes we really need to sit with ourselves as neurodivergent people and think what we have available, because burnouts can last a very long time.
absolutely, and ultimately it can cost more spoons than you're going to get back for a very long time, which will reduce your life enjoyment. Can I go back then to we're not a spoon charity? Because something about that sounds like it's also defending against expectations that other people might have, that doing things that cost energy are kind of nothing or small. So what might that be that is prompting that? What sort of requests?
So obviously we're coming up to Christmas now. Okay, so I go to Zumba one night a week, right? And there has been a Christmas party dinner thing. Now in theory I was free. In theory it was in a place that I wouldn't not go to. Um and you know, I'm quite new to that class. I haven't got particularly established relationships. But I was free and I could have gone. But I sat there and I was like, do I know I have that available? Do I know come the like that sort of that date? Because obviously these things, you know, like Christmas work dues or whatever are planned ridiculous like amounts of time in advance, even for somebody who's books stuff into 2025. But you know, this sort of that advanced thing, and then are like people are like, so are you coming? And there's a bit of that social pressure to it. But then you just think, do I know I have that available in me? Or do I actually need to think about how many spoons I've got left? And would they be better spent somewhere else, somewhere within my home, somewhere within my family, somewhere within doing something for me? And that sort of that thing about that advanced planning of your energy accountings, I think particularly for some of our community that struggle with advanced planning anyway, is really difficult.
Because you're planning, but without an essential variable predictable in the planning, as in you cannot necessarily, well, you can't know what your energy is actually going to be at that particular time when the plan comes to fruition. Yes, and that was, you know, when it comes to making a commitment.
And I'm shocking at cancelling things.
Yeah, because it feels bad, doesn't it? To
It
cancel
does.
a sense of, oh, I'm letting someone down, I'm changing the plan, oh, I can't do the thing. It's
Mhm.
kind of better to not commit to the thing.
Yeah.
I'm also, in terms of the spoon charity thing, I'm thinking, so I always want to say, in the context of having children, I can imagine this, even though it doesn't therefore happen to me and makes me relieved not to have them. So when I hear about a school, I'll just send a casual note home. Oh, can you bring a cake? Because it's bring a cake to school day. And then tomorrow, can you dress up as a book character? And then also on Friday, we
Mhm.
are saving the whales and the trees also. Can
Yes.
you send us a whale and also a tree? And I'd be like, whoa, these casual requests to you and nothing. Ooh, just bake a cake today. What? That is 4,000 spoons for me.
Yeah, I
I'm
don't pick it.
not going, right, yeah,
Yeah, no.
to be able to do that. And I know for some people, of course, they would enjoy it and it would give them spoons, it would give them energy. But certainly not for me. And it's that casual asking, oh, could you just? And it's funny that I'm not immediately being able to put it into a context in my life, but I do find it often could you just, oh, just a little, oh, a little tiny, just a, and so often the just a could be, I don't know, might even just be send an email about, well, a thing that I struggle with, fill out this very simple form. And that's potentially, for me, that is so many students. And that's why I'm so lucky now to have, via Access to Work, my brilliant admin assistant, Niobe. Thank goodness, because things that are not just she can do them now. Thank God.
Obviously, we all know that forms are my kryptonite. Um, and so many spoons, so many spoons. And you're right. I think obviously there is an aspect of parenting that is a demand on you, like from school, like, you know, we're having a Halloween party, bring a cake, random coloured clothes day. Luckily, the school that my children attend, my child attends now, isn't as bad for that as the previous one was. So there's a level there where I'm kind of getting away with it, but absolutely that. But I think obviously as neurodivergent adults who obviously normally have neurodivergent children, it's often the things that do take you spoons that you can't get away from. So like you're talking about forms. I have, and I think we talked about this before, that, I have access to work, but I don't have access to like somebody else doing the kids' EHCP process.
Mm.
Like that costs money if you're going to get an advocate in. Like there's no free resource for that. There's no, like, nobody's ever asked about like your disability needs within that. And that can take a lot of spoons. And then often you end up in meetings with schools, and depending on what that looks like, that can take a lot of spoons. And sometimes you just sort of think you need a level of reserve, but then obviously things can come along and you don't have any reserves. And then if there's demands on top of that, they can feel huge. But
Mm.
it's valid that they feel huge. If you are completely running on nothing, anything, no matter how big or small it is huge.
Absolutely. And again, that's very difficult for people to understand, isn't it? If they haven't got experience of that, how can this very tiny thing that we know will only take you 2 minutes, how can it be such a huge thing? But it's a multi-step process anyway, as in building up to doing the thing, never mind doing the thing that seems small but isn't.
But as well, like it might take them 2 minutes. So like it might not take me 2 minutes.
No.
I can remember there was a time where this came up recently, and it was suggested that a lot of parents have this like communication diary between schools where you sort of like you communicate with the teacher because you might not necessarily do the school runs if you like work full time. And I can remember having written one of them for my oldest. And because I'm dyslexic, I also didn't want to put like a ton of spelling mistakes in it and have somebody else assume like a level of incompetence. So like writing it, rechecking it, checking spellings on some very simple words. It wasn't a 2 minute job, but they'll have thought it was a 2 minute job for me, and that I had all the time in the world and all the spoons to do it. But I didn't.
No. Back to the double empathy problem, the difficulty that people can have in empathizing with neurodivergent people when they are not so themselves. Talking of 2 minutes, that's about how long we have got left, just enough to mention ahead of time, because it's only 4 months away now. To some people that's a long time, to some it's really not, and it's got Christmas in between, it doesn't even exist. But anyway, me and Nick are going to be at Gosford Civic Theatre on March the 6th doing a live recording of our podcast where you will have the chance to ask questions and say things and see us in the actual flesh.
Not too much flash.
No.
And we promise we will save spoons for you.
Well, if possible. It's an interesting one. So for me, performing can at least temporarily definitely gives me spoons. That live thing gives, but then they're slightly don't know if this stretches the metaphor too far, empty spoons, because they dissipate very quickly afterwards. It's like, yay, you've got 1,000 spoons. Oh, whoa, now you've got to minus 1,000 spoons because your adrenaline levels have dropped straight after. Anyway, and we have what's coming up next in the podcast series, Nick?
So next week we have guests again. We have Fergus and Sunny, and they are going to talk about monotropism.
A hyper-focused topic indeed. Well, let's save our spoons. We were going to record maybe 2 podcasts in this window, but we're not going to, because we've decided to, I think you would
set boundaries and save some spoons.
Like, yeah, no, save the spoons. So we will see you metaphorically next time. You'll see us. No, you'll hear us next time. Until then, goodbye.
Thanks for tuning in to Neurotypicals Don't Juggle Chainsaws. We're so glad you joined us today to explore the fascinating world of neurodivergence with your hosts, me, Nic King.
And me, Kate Fox. If our conversation sparked a thought, a question, or even a smile, don't keep it to yourself. Drop us a line at hello@neurotypicalsdon'tjugglechainsaws.co.uk or visit our website, neurotypicalsdon'tjugglechainsaws.co.uk, to write in. We'd love to hear from you.
If you enjoyed today's episode, consider leaving us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast platform.
Until next time, keep embracing the unique ways you juggle the chainsaws of life.